Now, I'm here to give the government perspective, so bear that in mind. And I know that you had a full day of a lot of very exciting presentations I've already heard, so there's a lot to live up to right now. Now, a lot of developments have happened within government about natural capital, its measurement, how it's applied. A whole world of thinking has developed there over the last few years. And this is just to set out in a quite schematic way what that all includes. Natural capital itself is a stock. So it's the stock of species, soils, freshwater, land, trees, etc., etc. And out of those, together with how we use land and a number of other capital inputs like human capital or physical man-made capital, flow the ecosystem services into goods that we then use, such as food, fiber, the water that comes out of the taps that we drink, etc. And those are benefits in most cases, and we're trying to put some values on it, and many of these benefits are actually those that we buy in the market, if you think of food and water. But it is important to understand what has been happening to some of the natural capital over the last few years. And given that the world population has increased by a very large number over the last century, and we are therefore using the services that come out of the natural capital much more intensively than we have before, I think it is time that government does start thinks about how we can value this natural capital to make sure that its allocation is efficient. Defra has done a lot of work in this space, and I think Defra has been, and I'm not a British national by birth, but if I look at my own country, Germany, Defra is really quite leading the way in thinking about natural capital. It has done a big study, the National Ecosystem Assessment, which looked at 8 broad UK habitats. This is a really important work that brought together a number of disciplines, including natural science, scientists, economists, and others. It is there to raise awareness of the importance of the natural environment to human well-being and also to economic prosperity. This was followed by the National Ecosystem Assessment follow-on, NIFO, as it's called by those people who love and deal with it a lot. This again was a study that provided a greater understanding of the value of the natural environment, in particular the cultural ecosystem services. And it develops a number of accounting and decision support tools that can be used by government, but also by business and the voluntary sector to understand the value of the natural environment. And I want to make a particular point about the business and voluntary sector behind it, because we have to be fully aware that caring for the natural environment is not just an issue for government. It cannot be just an issue for government. Going back a bit, now Defra has published the white paper, Natural Choice, which was published in 2011, I believe, or 2010. It's the first strategy for the natural environment in England for about 20 years. So again, it's quite a milestone within government thinking about the natural environment and how we use it. It reflects the value of nature in decision making, it reflects the value of nature in economic planning, and it captures the value of nature through markets. And I want to come back to this issue about markets in a minute. Since then, we have established 12 nature improvement areas which are funded by central government. It's a network of cross-sectoral partnerships working with local authorities, NGOs, private land managers, etc., to bring together these areas that drive ecosystem restoration and regeneration. The other document that you see here with the lovely coastline, I don't quite know where it is, but could be North Devon or somewhere, is Biodiversity 2020, which is a national strategy for England's wildlife and ecosystem services. This was published in summer 2011. And it sets out the government's ambition to hold the overall loss in biodiversity by 2020. There are a number of targets in there which you can look up, and on the last slide I have all the web addresses for these various documents, but it includes targets such as restoring 15% of the degraded ecosystems, etc. So it's a whole set, a kind of matrix of targets of what we want to achieve, and on top of that, a matrix with whom, or a layer with whom we want to achieve this. As I said, includes business and the voluntary sector. Coming to the next now, I want to talk a bit about how we value nature and why I think this is important. The Treasury published in 2003 the Green Book, which sets out the basic principles of project and policy assessment and evaluation. Now, this book is used, or the methods that are described in it for cost-benefit analysis, they are used when it comes to the point of allocating budgets to different government departments, when it comes to the point of assessing whether a regulation is cost-beneficial or not, or who will bear the costs and the benefits of a regulation, and it's used in all the different business cases that are going through the various departments. So therefore, the methods that are in there have an impact of how money is spent. In 2012, we had a success in being able to publish a supplementary guidance to the Green Book, which is therefore used across the whole of government on how to assess environmental impacts. So this will be used by the Department for Communities and Local Government, by DFT, etc., to assess the impact of their policies on the environment. It might not look like much, quite a kind of modest publication, but from a decision-maker's point of view, it is quite a step forward. So what we're trying to do is to mainstream the value of nature in policy appraisal and therefore try and embed it within the practice. And of course, being analysts, and I'm particularly a fan of evaluation, I wanted to find out whether people were actually using it in that way. And we did a study where we went through a number of impact assessments, so assessing the impact of regulations of other government departments, and had a look at how well they were using our guidance. And it's a bit of a mixed picture, as usually. There are clearly some successes that impact on the environment was used, but at times some small areas, less significant impacts are omitted, and certainly the whole idea of ecosystem services and of valuing those ecosystem services is one that is not quite embedded and understood yet. And to some extent, I have to forgive the economists in the various departments, such as education, local government, that they hadn't quite got their heads around the whole concept. But we can now build on that as we're understanding now better where the issues are for the other analysts across government. But we are not stopping on this. Sorry, this was too fast. We are also now, as the Green Book is currently being reviewed, we are trying to change the Green Book and have the natural capital concept and ecosystem services included in the Green Book. And we are negotiating this with the Treasury right at the moment. Now, we have a long-term program of work for incorporating the value of nature into national accounts. I heard that you've already had a talk this morning from an accountant who told you about the work that is going on in this space. So it might be worth not saying too much about it, apart from the fact that we had very constructive meetings with the Office for National Statistics, assessing the value of natural capital and how that could be included in the national accounts, side by side with GDP and similar data. But we can discuss more detail in the round that might make more sense. Now, the Natural Capital Committee, of course, was also one of the commitments of the white paper, the mother and child picture on one of the earlier slides, that publication. And it provides advice to government on where and how natural assets are used and whether they are used unsustainably. They advise the government on how it should prioritize to protect and improve natural capital. And it also advises on research priorities to improve future advice. So it has a role in assessing how we are doing, pointing out where there are particular issues and problems, and then also pointing out to government where more research has to be done. And I think the line at the bottom there that it reports to the Economic Affairs Committee is quite an important one, because that reports to the Chancellor, and so it's right in the heart of government. They're reporting to one of the most important ministers. The Natural Capital Committee has published a really interesting slide which you cannot read, but I have been promised that these would all be circulated after the conference, and probably most of you will have read their various reports. And this is just to illustrate. It looks at these 7 different areas of ecosystem services, or rather of natural capital, and whether and how they have been improved, they have improved or not. So it's a very schematic way of looking at this evidence. It produces an annual State of Natural Capital report. The next one is due in January, is that right, Helen? Yes, so they're heavily working on that. The NCC works with us in Defra as well as with the Office for National Statistics to change the national accounts accordingly. Now, in addition, we've also done work with business. In particular, the Ecosystem Market Task Force has done a lot of interesting work. And that is in particular to look at how we can involve business in improving, or first in acknowledging and valuing natural capital, and then hopefully also in improving it. So the Ecosystem Market Task Force was a very practical and business-led review. And I think I see some people who have been on the task force. Yeah, exactly, point. So they will be able to tell you a lot more about it. But I think it is very important that business understands, A, what kind of natural capital does it own, and how is it using the flows that are coming out of the natural capital that is owned. And the NCC's Secretariat is currently running a pilot with a number of businesses looking at their assets in terms of natural capital, at the flow, how they're using it, and then assessing afterwards whether that use is sustainable or not, i.e. whether their stock of natural capital is deteriorating over time or not. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that whenever they finish that piece of work in their next publication, because I think business, first realizing what the natural assets are that they own, and then understanding how they're using the flow of services that are coming out of these assets will be a very useful piece of learning for the rest of the business community, and also for the voluntary and public sector, I guess. Now, I think one can think about natural capital as a bit of infrastructure. So one can use green infrastructure as a substitute for the kind of traditional engineered infrastructure. Water flows are always a very good example for that. And here are a number of other examples on the map. But so one can show how catchments are managed upstream and how that can reduce costs of the treatment of water further downstream. And there is some work going on with the Southwest Water oh crikey, that is a fantastic acronym here. Southwest Water Upstream Thinking, or United Utilities program of work that looks at how treating the upstream water in a sustainable way will then reduce the costs later on downstream when the water is used by consumers. And I think that is a really positive example of how natural capital and ecosystem services can be used, and how also one can value and make business pay for the services that it actually uses. From that point of view, I consider this a really useful example. Now, there are a few high-level messages which I definitely want you to take away from this, is how natural capital can help to, the concept of natural capital can help to reframe the debate of the importance of the natural environment to the economy and to society. To think about for example, those uplands where the water is cleaned by natural processes, to think about that as an infrastructure and as a service provider rather than just as something that happens to be there and that is owned by everybody, will be much more useful when we make decisions about how to use those upland areas. It's really important to recognize the value of natural capital to the country's long-term economic growth and prosperity. And I don't know how many of you might have heard the Secretary of State's speech a few days ago. Has anybody heard her talk about the environment? A few people in the back. She made that point very clearly, that there is a positive correlation between a functioning environment and having these ecosystem services, she might not have used that term, and a growing economy. So instead of having this dichotomy or the adversarial relationship, she did point out very clearly that there's a positive relationship between those two. And that is something I also want to be quite clear about. Therefore, the decline in natural capital is not good for the economy, and investing in natural capital can actually deliver substantial economic benefits for the future and can in the future be more cost effective than trying to always fix a problem that has been created. Thank you.